Well, good morning and welcome to our Meet the Instruments webinar this morning. I'm Tatty Theo, I'm the cellist with the Brook Street Band, and it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Kathryn Parry, our violinist. If you joined us a fortnight ago, Kathryn presented the first in her sessions on Meet the Instruments talking about the violin, and Kathryn's a fantastic communicator, player, educator, and has a real passion for sharing this knowledge. And I'm delighted that Kathryn's back today, not only with the violin, but with a special guest who I'll let Kathryn tell you a little bit more about later. There'll be a chance to ask questions via the chat function, and I've left the settings open so any late attendees can join. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Kathryn. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you, Tatty, so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me, especially on such a lovely sunny day. Today I'd love to talk to you about my bow, how it makes the strings of my violin vibrate, and how I can change the sound to create different feelings and expressions. In the last session I did a lot of pizzicato. I plucked my strings. That's a little bit out of tune there. Pluck my strings to show you how they vibrated and how the vibrations were amplified with this beautiful violin-shaped box of air. And I'd actually like to refer to a question that somebody made last week. So Samson, if you're listening, you asked a question about the F holes and you said, could it be any letter or does it have to be an F? Well, I've since found out that the fact that it's an F is absolutely crucial. A group of scientists at MIT, which is a big science university in the States, in America, have done lots of calculations, and they've worked out that the F shape emits many, many more times amplification than other shapes and other letters. So thank you for that question. I'm sorry the answer is a little bit late. So someone once said, we also found out that the fingers of my left hand can change the notes that I play, change the pitches by changing the length of the strings. And a quote I read the other day said that the left hand makes the notes, but the bow makes the music. Now that's quite a bold claim, but I do think it's the bow that makes the magic and how we create different sounds and different effects. So I'd like to play you one of my favourite pieces. It's by a Belgian Baroque composer from the beginning of the 18th century called Joseph Hector Fiocco, and he wrote a piece called Arioso, which literally means a piece that is sung. So I'm going to try to make my violin sing. And I wonder if you can have a think about whether this piece makes you feel calm or excited or warm or cold or happy or sad, and just see if the music makes you feel different things. If you can think of a really exciting adjective about how you're feeling, perhaps you can post it in the comments and Tatty will tell me after I've played you the piece. I've recorded the keyboard part on the piano, but of course pianos weren't really in use when Fiocco wrote this piece. He would have played it on a different keyboard instrument, and I wonder if you know what that is. Again, you could maybe write your suggestions in a comment and send it to Tatty. So through the wonders of technology, I hope it's on a Bluetooth speaker down here, so I hope that it's going to play properly. Here we go.
beautiful, Kathryn. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
We've got a couple of good answers to the keyboard instrument that would have been used. So we've got Clara, who says, would it have been a harpsichord?
Well, I think that it probably would have been a harpsichord. Fiocco was a harpsichordist. So it's very likely that he would have written that piece playing the harpsichord himself. Maybe he had a pal who played the violin and they played it together. So that's a brilliant answer. Did you have any other instruments suggested?
Well, no, but I've got a couple of comments actually. I've got Solomon saying, it makes me feel very calm and happy.
Solomon, thank you very much. That's what I was trying to feel. My heart was beating a little bit fast, to be honest, but I was trying to put across a calm and happy feeling. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
And also Eileen says harpsichord as well, and happy feeling. Yes. So
thank you very much. I suppose it is possible that he might have played it on a small chamber organ as well. It's a different type of keyboard instrument, but that's for a different specialist, a keyboard specialist about that one. But I think harpsichord is probably the best answer for that question. Well done, everybody. So we're going to take a little tour around the bow now. I'm just going to pop the violin down. So this is a modern bow. This is not the type of bow that we use in the Brook Street Band, but I'll come to that a little bit later. So the bow has a stick which is made of a hard wood. There's a Brazilian wood called Pernambuco, which people I think use nowadays. In Baroque period there was a snake wood, very specialist wood. It means it's very strong, but it's also very flexible, which helps us again to use different bow strokes and create different colours. The wood is attached at either end to hair. It's actual hair from an actual animal. I wonder if you can think what that animal might be. Look at the length of it. You have to think of an animal with a really long tail, maybe? Yes, it's horse. It's a horse's hair. Excuse me. And if you looked at horse's hair very, very closely under a microscope, you could see that it has lots of little tiny bumps on it. And the bumps, when I use the bow on the string, make the string vibrate using something called friction. You've all heard of that, haven't you? Doing your physics, lots of equations in making music. It's called friction, and that makes the strings vibrate, which are then amplified by the violin. It's a little bit like if you've got Velcro on your shoes. Sorry, this is really old sandal that I found. It's got lots of little hooks, hasn't it, that stick together. So perhaps you can imagine that the hairs of my bow have little hooks that grip the strings as I move the bow hair along. We also apply a special substance to the bow to make it even stickier. This is called rosin, and it comes in a block like this. It's an organic substance. It comes from a tree, a pine tree or a conifer tree. And although it looks like a block, when I apply it to the hair of my bow to make all those little bumps and hooks even stickier, you can see that it actually makes... Ooh, can you see that dust coming off the bow hair? And that's very, very sticky. You don't actually want to get it on your fingers. And often when you see string players play an orchestra, if they put lots of rosin on, you can see it in clouds, and certainly we get a layer of it on the tops of our instruments. It's very acidic, so we really need to dust that off after we've practiced or played in a concert. So I think now it's time to just show you how the bow hair grips the string and makes the strings vibrate. So just as we pluck them and the strings go fizzy, the bow hairs make the strings vibrate. There has to be just the right amount of tension in the hair to get the strings to vibrate properly. And modern bows like this have a screw mechanism which tightens and loosens the hair. Again, because it's real hair, it does stretch, so you need to loosen it when you're not actually playing. But if I take the screw right out of the bow, you can see the hairs are getting looser and looser. It's a very, very long spindle. And I can detach the frog here, this block of wood, and actually take the bow hairs out. There are around 180 hairs on a modern bow like this. Oh, and there's a very tiny, can you see there's a little eyelet there on top of the frog? And that's how I insert the spindle like that and screw the screw in. And the frog is actually being tightened and pulled along that way. And that's what tightens the hair. It has to be just the right amount of tension. Now, the earliest bows were shaped like bows and arrows. They were real concave shape. And in fact, the word for a bow maker is an archetier, which sounds a bit like archery, doesn't it? Or archer. And they didn't have a screw mechanism, and they didn't have any way of tightening the hair except to use their fingers. They used to wind the hair round their fingers somehow. I've no idea how they did it, and created tension like that. So as the bows developed, this is a copy of a sort of, I suppose, an early 17th century bow. And it also doesn't have a screw at the end. And it tightens the hair by actually having a detachable frog. This little block here, actually, if I can collect the hair and clip it in like this, it's called a clip-in. Could you hit? Oh, I haven't done that very well. But it clips in to a little notch on the bow, and that's how the hair is tightened. So a little bit later on, this is the type of bow, this is the bow I use actually when I play with the Brook Street Band. The early 18th century bow, a Baroque bow. And by this time, bow makers were putting screws in. Unlike the violin, which hasn't really changed in shape very much for hundreds and hundreds of years, bows have gone through many, many changes. I think as bow makers were encouraged by composers to make different sounds. If you have a look at the Baroque bow here, it's very, very tapered at the end, which means it's very light. It's also, if I pick up a modern bow, it's also much shorter than a modern bow, and it's very hard to play loud and sustained music at the point. And I think as composers demanded a more sustained sound, and also we were competing in volume with wind and brass instruments which were evolving, bow makers had to up their game really and use technology to find a way of increasing the strength of the bow at the point, which means that we could make a more sustained sound. And conversely, it's very hard to play with sort of authentic phrasing and articulation with a modern bow, and that's why it's so glorious to play in the Brook Street Band on original instruments that the composers might have known at the time. Tati, did you want to say something there?
Yes, I just thought I'd point out I've got two of my cello bows here, and from your modern instruments, the bows all look pretty standard, don't they? There's not a big difference between anyone's violin or cello bow, but there's a lot of variety. Some of them have wooden frogs. My top bow has a wooden frog, and my bottom bow has, actually this is bone. Some have ivory from many years ago, although that's of course not allowed anymore, but they work in the same way as Kathryn explained. These both have frogs that work with a screw, but they're slightly different. The wood on this, I don't know if you can see, is fluted, and the wood on this one is completely smooth. They're both made of snake wood, in fact, because it looks like snake skin. But yes, I just thought it'd be interesting to see the two early. These are both copies of early 18th century cello bows.
Thank you, thank you. I think bow making, as violin making, is like art. Bow making was a real thing, especially in France in the 19th century, and there are absolutely exquisite bows. They even had tortoise shell, and this one actually is rather lovely. It's got a gold screw here and gold fittings on the frog. This is a 19th century bow from France. Anyway, when we play stringed instruments, we have to be like Goldilocks. We're always looking for the sound that's just right. So if I press too hard with my bow, I can actually kill the strings and stop the vibrations, and it sounds really horrible. Like that. And we don't want that sound. If I have a bow that's too light, it's very difficult to control, and it sounds a bit squeaky. That's not a good sound. So we're looking for the sound that's just right. And to do this, I think we're constantly balancing three things. We're balancing the speed of the bow, the pressure or the weight or the amount the bow is contacting the string, and the position of the bow with relation to the bridge. The string is very, very tight up here near the bridge. The tension is at its greatest. And down here over the fingerboard, the strings are quite floppy and loose. So I'm always balancing these three things. And we can think of dynamics. So composers put in fortes for loud and piano for soft and lots of things in between. But I think we can go further. I think we can use this constant balance to evoke feelings and expressions and colours. Some people say it's like an artist's palette where they mix up all the colours. And I play a game with all my students, even the beginners who can only just play on open strings. And it's 100% successful. I ask them to think of a feeling. So if they say happy, we say, okay, let's play with happy bows. And they always go like this. With a lovely warm sound, kind of in the middle, where it's really easy to play resonantly. And if I say, or if they say sad or forlorn, then 100% they play with a very slow, soft bow and don't press very hard like this. So I think it's a really easy way to get my students to acknowledge that they can feel things with the music, and they can also express things with the music more than just what's written on the page. And composers also ask us to play with different effects, different bowing techniques, again to make different colours and pictures. So if I want to play with a really icy sound, I can play on the bridge, and this is called Sul Pontitella. We have a lot of Italian words, Sul Pontitella, so it sounds very icy. And if I want to, or if they ask for a sort of misterioso or foggy sound, we're going with the weather here. Over the fingerboard, with a light floaty bow. And then I can bounce my bow and make sort of raindrop sounds like this. Or I can jump in puddles, and that makes me think of a very short but on the string stroke like this. That's staccato or marcato. I can play with very, very fast notes, and the instruction often from a composer is sautier, and I think it comes from the word sauter to jump, like saute potatoes, jumping in a pan. Like that. Or I can play with a ricochet bow, which is when it's actually rebounding. It literally means rebounding on the string, and it sounds a bit like castanets. Little Spanish dance there. I can also play more than one note in my bow. And in the fiocco piece earlier, did you notice I played lots and lots of notes all in one bow? And it's called slurs, obviously. And I try to make those as legato, as smooth as possible, even when I cross the strings. And on string instruments, we're very lucky. We can actually play duets with ourselves. We can play on more than one string at once, and I can make a little accompaniment to a tune. So there are many, many other techniques which I can't demonstrate and I can't do, but there's a whole range, millions and millions of different things that we can do. But that's just a sort of little introduction to how the bow works and how it can make different sounds. But now comes the highlight of the session, and I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce my daughter Freya.
Hello everyone!
And Freya has brought her instrument along. She's brought her cello. Now Freya has been at university for the last 3 years, has just graduated, and hasn't really played her cello that much. She's been doing lots of other exciting things, but I'm so delighted that she's come to play. We're going to play a piece together in a second, but I'm just going to ask Freya to hold the cello up next to the violin. If I angle this camera down a little bit. Now, when we met the viola, and that was Freya's sister Imogen last week, there was a little bit of difference. You all said, oh yeah, the viola's bigger, and it plays lower notes because it's got a lower string, the C string. But there's no doubt, is there, that the cello is much, much bigger. So if the composer was, viola was like a brother or sister, cello really is like mum or dad. And I think it won't be a surprise that the cello plays lower notes than the violin and the viola. Shall we pluck our strings, Freya?
Yeah.
So we also much easier to see the strings vibrating because they're so much longer. So here's the violin. Really good, really good. And I think in terms of the sort of range and register, we mentioned chamber organs earlier. Tati, is a cello the equivalent of an 8-foot?
Yes, the cello is very much an 8. So I've got my cello here because I thought
Yay!
a few things on the Baroque cello. No, the cello is an 8-foot instrument, and I know that in a fortnight we'll come to a 16-foot instrument. But yes, we play an 8-foot, whereas the violin is a 4-foot. So viola's a 4-foot instrument. So yes, we sound lower, bigger and lower.
So lots of differences, I suppose, with the cello and the violin, although they're still this beautiful shape. And Freya's got F holes on her cello as well. But I think it's pretty clear that Freya, who is quite tiny, couldn't fit the cello underneath her chin to play. That would be far too hard. So yes, you all know the answer. She sits and plays the cello between her knees, and she's got a spike or an end pin, thank you Freya, which is quite a sort of modern invention, which is attached to the, it's like a telescopic thing, so it sits inside the cello when she's not actually playing it, and it supports the cello when she's sitting down. But I said it's quite a modern invention. I've seen paintings where cellists have their instruments actually resting on the floor or on a little tiny table or footstool that's at the best height for that player. But Tati, in Brook Street Band, how would you play a Baroque cello?
Well, you cradle it in between your calf muscles. You basically sit with your feet flat on the floor, sort of ballet position 4. I can't actually show you the floor right now. but it's just cradled in your calf muscles. You don't have to grip. The only problem is if you're wearing slippery shoes or high heels or something like that, then sometimes it feels a little unstable. So the ideal solution is a nice flat floor, not too polished, and trainers or something. And it's incredibly comfortable. And as Kathryn said, it could have been rested. Look, here we go. It's on a piano stool right now, and that I could happily play like that. If I was very tiny, I could actually just have it on the floor and play it like a double bass. And in France, often you find old cellos from the 18th century in France with holes drilled in their backs, and they used to attach a strap, so it could be around your neck, and you could walk and play at the same time. This was largely used for outdoor processional music, because early 18th century French people didn't hold the cello in such high regard. They preferred the viola da gamba at that point, which is a different family of instruments altogether. But that's the bottom of my cello to compare to Freya's. I don't have the option of a spike at all.
Wow.
Even if I wanted one, it's not there. It's just a little button to hold the tailpiece in place.
And doesn't it get quite tiring? Are you using your muscles in your lower legs all the time?
No, I think it's tiring when you begin. I've taught people who've tried this posture, and until you get comfortable, people tend to brace their legs a little bit and the muscles ache. But I've been doing it for so long now that no, it doesn't feel tiring.
That's
It
amazing.
feels very comfortable.
I always think it's just amazing. I think it looks so free as well and so comfortable. Because of course, how many times do we see cellos whose spikes slip and then they can't play because they're not in the right position? Freya's actually got a sort of series of holes on a piece of wood that she's got on the floor down there.
No, I wish I could say it's very difficult to do, but actually it's supremely comfortable. Secret out now.
So, of course, on this modern violin, there are also lots of bits of equipment to help me support the instrument when I play later music. But I thought I'd talk about that in the next session. I've got a few violins that I'd like to bring along, if you can join me in 2 weeks' time. So we'd love to finish now by playing a piece of, it's a piece by George Friedrich Handel. It's a sonata for violin and continuo, which means a bass line, and there would normally be a keyboard instrument as well. A harpsichord, I think, is the best choice for this. And Handel would have written just a bass line with numbers to indicate which chords to play in the right hand of the keyboard. And our Callie, who is our harpsichordist in Brook Street Band, is completely brilliant at doing this, and I'm sure she could talk to you for hours about how it's done. But we haven't got a keyboard instrument with us today, so we're just going to play a melody and a bass line, and we'd love it if you listen to how we're having a musical conversation. So although I suppose the melody is in my part, Freya is definitely responding with musical answers. So here we are. It's Handel's Sonata in F major. It's the first movement. It's called Adagio, which actually means a slow piece, but I think it still has elements of dance in it. It's got beautiful rhythms. And in case you didn't know, Handel, when he lived one of the periods in London, he lived in Brook Street in London, which is why we're called the Brook Street Band. So this is Handel's Sonata in F major, first movement.
Just as Kathryn and Freya get ready, I'll add that the sonata, this particular one, was composed in roughly 1732. And actually, if you've ever hung on and waited for the phone to be answered at the associated board, you'll know this sonata because they play it as their answer phone music. much, Kathryn and Freya. That was beautiful. I absolutely love that piece, and that was a gorgeous rendition of that movement.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Freya, for joining on the bass line.
Yeah, represent.
It's one of my favourite bass lines to play, but the internet being what it is impossible for me to play from here with Kathryn. So
Yeah.
you were there and were able to do that so beautifully. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. My pleasure.
So I don't know if we've got any questions, if we've got a lot of attendees actually, whether or not anyone has any burning questions they want to ask or any comments about the music that Kathryn could answer, or I could as well.
Well, you could ask Freya what she did most when she was at Manchester University. Don't ask that.
I've got a thank you from Ava. That was a lovely performance to end a really fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome. Thank you.
From Ava.
My bad.
I've got a question actually. I've been wondering. I don't know. We might not actually know the answer now, but it's about the why we know why this bit of the bow that we refer to here as the frog is called the frog?
It is called the frog, and you're right. No one really knows. Apparently, and bow makers will correct me on this, but they use a special device to make the frog, and it's called a frock. Spelt like a dress, a frock. Also, another thing that I found out the other day was that a blacksmith, when they're shoeing a horse, they have a special, in German, Rachel will be able to tell you, a Frosche. It's also called a frog, and it's supposed to act as a shock absorber. And I thought that was really interesting because also when I'm teaching, I try and use the analogy of a shock absorber for my right hand fingers, because when we change the direction of the bow, we have to kind of, like on a swing, when your legs go at a different speed from the swing, and it's almost like when you're jumping, you have to jump with soft knees. So it's a little bit like shock absorbers, but nobody really knows. But those are two ideas about where that word might have come from.
Brilliant, thank you, Kathryn. I've got a question, one for you and one for me actually, from well, actually a couple more coming in, but we'll go to Eileen's question first. This is for you. Which horsehair is best?
Do you mean white or black, I suppose?
I think so. I imagine that's what Eileen means, because they're, of course, yeah.
Do you know, I'm afraid, Eileen, I can't answer that. I do know that I think that the black horsehair is coarser. I know that when they're checking the bows through, they have to eliminate the hairs which are uneven, which are too thick or too thin. But I think I have pupils who had their bows rehead. It just looks a bit odd. Tatty, do you know the answer to that?
Well, I don't know. Traditionally, it's sort of the established norm now. I mean, this is a cello bow, a Baroque one. I'll get you a modern one as well, and a bass bow. Just so you can see lots of different. That's a cello bow, so white hair, and actually that's a double bass bow, white hair. You often find double bass bows with black hair because I think it is purely and simply grippier, stickier. It might have more of the little hooks on it, Kathryn, that you described.
Yeah, that's what that rings bells.
And occasionally you'll find a cello bow with a black horsehair as well, but not so often. I recently had my son's double bass bow rehead, and the luthier asked which kind of hair I wanted. So there was a choice involved. He put white on because that's what he happened to have in stock at the time. And Eileen also asks, does it hurt the horse? No.
No, it doesn't hurt the horse.
Like cutting human hair, it's keratin, it's dead. I don't think they feel anything. And I had a question for me. How do you carry the cello around? Well, I have out of sight here, variety of different cases. I've got a soft case if I'm not going very far. I've mostly hard cases. They're much safer for transporting, and you can get backpack arrangements, and they're surprisingly light these days. So
But you still have to collect a whole new set of muscles, don't you?
yeah, and actually, if you're not careful, you can find yourself, if you carry it on one side, tensing the side that it's on. I used to carry it on my right shoulder, and I'd get shooting pains up my neck after a while, migraine, because I was tensing that side. So it's better to balance it in a backpack if you can. And
And
just use
again,
your
you know,
legs.
technology as materials advance. I mean, there are all sorts of carbon fiber things. Which the first time I got a carbon case, fiber
No
carber
carbon
case,
fibre.
carbon fiber case, and I was cycling with it actually, and I took it off my back, and I had a complete panic that there was no violin inside because it was so light. So I
They
had to
are.
stop and open it because they are ridiculously light, but also very strong, and it's the safety that of the instrument that's the most important thing, I
Yeah.
think.
I've got another question. Does the bow make a different sound if it has more or less hairs?
Oh, that's a really good question.
That's from
Um,
either Solomon or Samson. I'm not sure.
yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think my the hairs, they do break. They're organic, and so they do break. And certainly, as you lose hairs, the effectiveness of the bow kind of diminishes. But it happens hand in hand with the little hooks actually just wearing out. And we need to get our bows re-haired with fresh hair, and it always transforms everything. But I think it's a combination of fewer hairs and the fact that they wear out.
There is actually a sort of tipping point, isn't there? You mentioned with your modern bow roughly 180 hairs. On my Baroque cello bow, the number is fewer, but I do know that the Ina Keller, who made this bow, this beautiful bow for me, counts out when she rehairs it for me. I send it to Germany for rehairing, and she counts out the exact number of hairs for the bow. I suppose there must be a small percentage in there because, as you say, they're natural and organic and they break. And, you know, you often find horsehair snapping. So there's obviously a small allowance for that. But apart from that, it's a very precise calculation. I've got a comment. I think it's from Clara again, to either of us. But have you ever thought of playing a different instrument?
Oh, yes, many times. So I think, like many people, I started having piano lessons when I was a child, and I sort of did them in tandem, but I found it much more difficult, and especially sort of sight reading. Ugh. And now I can barely play the accompaniments for my pupils. So it's sort of use it or lose it, really. So, but I always sort of hanker after learning. I'd love to play the oboe actually. So you never know, maybe. But that I that's what I because I think again it's all about making instruments sing, and when an oboe is played at its most beautifully, um, I sort of think that I might have been able to do that. How about you, Tati?
Well, I'm sort of dabbling a little bit in the modern double bass with my son who learns. Because he's got a small bass, I can make it fit for my hand. I think once he's got a bigger bass, it'll be harder, and the fingering is very different, and it's tuned in fourths rather than fifths like our violin or cello. But actually, the instrument I love hearing is the massive, great church organ. I did study keyboard, I studied harpsichord, and I wish I'd been allowed to try a church organ with pedals when I was younger. I have to say, at the moment, I'm completely loving Mendelssohn's organ sonatas, and just the power and the sense of filling a big building. But 99% of the time, I'm very, very happy with my Baroque cello. Um, no desire to change.
I think for me, a stringed instrument, it is that huge range of colour, and I'm certainly not saying that you can't do this on other instruments. And um, one of my dearest friends is the most incredible bassoonist, and when you hear her play the bassoon, it absolutely sounds like she's singing, and it's just uniquely beautiful. Um, but I think it's just that huge range of colours that we can find in different effects. So
Well, that's fantastic session, Kathryn. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if there's any other questions coming through. I wonder if Eileen had another question to ask. I had a message flash up on my screen. So we'll chat for a little bit longer in case you wanted to ask a question, Eileen, on the chat function. But just to say, I'm absolutely fascinating learning more about particularly the modern bow, because I'm a Baroque player, and they do work in very different ways. All those wonderful techniques you showed, like I mean, Sul Pontitella by the bridge is used in Vivaldi, the Four Seasons, but some of those other spiccato techniques, they're more, you can actually do them with your modern bow because it's powerful, whereas with one of these, it isn't as, it's a different kind of, it's like a paintbrush really, but it's got different strengths and weaknesses to Catherine's modern bow.
But as I said, it works the other way as well. So to try and recreate beautiful, authentic articulation is incredibly hard with a modern bow. We can sometimes simulate it by holding the bow a little bit higher up, and that changes the weight. So we haven't got such a huge balance issue. So we're holding it not near the middle, but it just means that this part of the bow that we play with is shorter and it feels much lighter. And if my students are playing Baroque pieces or earlier pieces, I do try and encourage them to do that, because otherwise they can't find the lightness in the sound. And somehow the bow, gosh, it's a huge percentage of the struggle with how to articulate that sort of music, isn't it?
Yes. Especially in Baroque music, the bow really is the sort of crucial. We have so much variety and capability within our bows. But Kathryn, thank you so much.
You're
I
very
can't wait
welcome.
to see your session in a fortnight's time with all the different kind of violins as well.
Thank you so much.
And in between next week, do come back and join us for Lizette's recorder and flute session. She'll be gradually bringing in the flute as well as more of her enormous collection of recorders, so you can hear more of how those instruments sound. And any questions, do get in touch, and you can always ask a question in advance so we can prepare the answer for you. But have a wonderful Saturday, enjoy the sunshine, and thank you so much, Kathryn, for
You're so welcome. Thank you everybody for coming along.
Too.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you to Kathryn and Freya, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.